What did a medieval knight really eat on a campaign? If you're picturing a banquet of roasted boar and overflowing goblets of wine every night, well, you might want to stick around. The truth is far more brutal, and honestly, a lot more interesting. We're going to peel back the layers of myth and legend to uncover the gritty, life-or-death reality of fueling a walking, fighting medieval war machine. And I promise you, what you think you know is probably wrong. Let's set the scene. You're a knight. You're not in your comfortable castle, you're on the march. It's cold, it's wet, and you've been riding for weeks. Your entire world is your horse, your armor, and the rumbling in your stomach. What do you reach for? It wasn't a leg of mutton. It wasn't even fresh bread most of the time. The single most important food for any medieval army, from the lowest archer to the most noble knight, was something called hardtack. Ever heard of it? It also goes by the name ship's biscuit or sea bread, and it's as appetizing as it sounds. We're talking about a simple mixture of flour, water, and maybe a little salt. That's it. This dough was baked multiple times until it was bone dry and rock solid. Why? Because it was built to last. It wouldn't mold. It could survive months, even years, in a saddlebag or a supply wagon. It was the original MRE, the military ration of its day. But here's the thing about hardtack. It was hard, like tooth-breakingly hard. Soldiers would have to soak it in whatever liquid they had available. Water, beer, wine, or if they were lucky, some kind of broth or stew, just to make it edible. They would hack at it with their daggers, and even then, it was often infested with weevils and maggots. Knights would complain in their letters home about their biscuits crawling away. The common joke was to tap your hardtack on the table before you ate it, to knock the bugs out. Or, if you were eating in the dark, you just tried not to think about the extra protein. So that's the base layer, a dry, often insect-ridden cracker. But knights were nobles, right? They were the elite fighting force. They had to get more than just flour and water. And they did. But it wasn't glamorous. The next staple was salted meat. Think of the toughest, driest beef jerky you've ever had, and then multiply the salt content by 10. Pork and beef were the most common. The animals would be slaughtered, and the meat would be heavily cured in salt to preserve it for the long march. It was chewy, intensely salty, and often required as much soaking as the hardtack. Sometimes they'd just gnaw on a piece of it dry. It was pure, functional protein. You weren't savoring the flavor. You were just trying to get enough fuel to swing a sword without collapsing. So you've got your hardtack and your salt pork. What else? Cheese. Lots of hard-aged cheese. Like the hardtack and salted meat, it was chosen for its durability. It wouldn't spoil quickly, and it was packed with fat and calories, essential for staying warm and energized. Think of something like a modern pecorino or a very, very dry Parmesan. It was another dense, portable source of energy they could eat on the move. And to wash it all down, forget clean, fresh water. Water sources on a campaign were notoriously unreliable and often contaminated. Drinking from the wrong stream could take a knight out of the fight faster than any enemy sword. The solution was alcohol. Not for getting drunk, but for hydration. They drank what was known as small beer or weak ale. It was low in alcohol content, often just 1 or 2%, but the brewing process killed off the dangerous bacteria, making it much safer to drink than water. Wine was also common, especially in regions like France, and it was often mixed with water to both purify it and make the supply last longer. A knight might be allocated a gallon of this weak ale or watered-down wine per day. It was their canteen, their Gatorade, and their water purifier all in one. So the average meal for a knight on the march might be a chunk of hardtack soaked in ale, a few strips of salt pork, and a hunk of hard cheese. Eaten cold, in the saddle, in the pouring rain. Not exactly the romantic image, is it? But here's where it gets really interesting. And this is the part that might change how you see medieval warfare entirely. The biggest challenge for any medieval army wasn't the enemy. It was logistics. It was food. An army of thousands of men and horses is a ravenous beast. Keeping it fed was a monumental task. Supply wagons were slow, vulnerable to attack, and couldn't carry enough to sustain an army for long. So what did they do? They foraged. Or, to use the more accurate medieval term, they practiced chevauchée. This wasn't just a bit of casual berry picking. Chevauchée was a brutal, systematic military strategy. Armies would intentionally march through enemy territory, not just to fight, but to live off the land. They would strip every village, every farm, every field bare. They'd take the grain, slaughter the livestock, and drink the wine and ale from the cellars. For the knight, this meant that sometimes their diet would suddenly improve dramatically. One day you're gnawing on weevil-infested hardtack, the next you're feasting on a freshly slaughtered pig and drinking a nobleman's finest wine because your army just ransacked his estate. This was the boom and bust cycle of the campaign diet. It was either rock-bottom rations or a sudden, chaotic glut of fresh food. This strategy had a dual purpose. It fed the invading army while simultaneously devastating the enemy's economy and morale. It was a weapon of war, and food was the ammunition. Okay, so we've established the diet was tough, based on preserved foods and supplemented by organized, brutal raiding. It doesn't sound great, but it makes sense, right? It's practical, but what if I told you that one of the most sought-after, energy-packed superfoods for a knight in wartime wasn't meat or cheese or even bread? It was garlic, and onions, and leeks. These humble vegetables were worth their weight in gold on a campaign. Why? Well, first, flavor. Imagine you've been eating nothing but salty meat and bland, dry biscuit for 3 weeks. The sharp, pungent kick of a raw clove of garlic or a wild onion would have been a taste explosion. It made the miserable rations bearable. Soldiers would carry strings of them. They would chew on them raw. But it was more than just flavor. Medieval people, through observation, understood that these alliums had health benefits. They might not have known about vitamins or antibacterial properties, but they knew that soldiers who ate garlic and onions seemed to be hardier. They got sick less often. And in the cramped, unsanitary conditions of a military camp where disease could wipe out more soldiers than battle, this was a massive advantage. They were a medieval first aid kit, and a morale booster rolled into one. Armies would specifically target vegetable gardens and farms to get their hands on them. A knight might value a sack of onions as much as a new wineskin. It was that important. It was the secret weapon that kept the medieval war machine running. But there's a twist to this whole story. We think of knights as the top of the food chain, the 1% of the medieval world. And while that was true at home, on a campaign the lines got blurry. The harsh reality of war was the great equalizer. When supplies ran out, and they often did, especially during a long siege or a disastrous retreat, a knight's noble blood meant nothing to an empty stomach. They starved, just like the lowest foot soldier. In these desperate times, all the rules went out the window. They ate their horses. Not the war horses, the magnificent destriers, they were too valuable. But the pack horses, the sumpter horses, were walking emergency rations. During the First Crusade, for example, accounts from the Siege of Antioch are horrifying. The Crusaders were starving. They ate their pack animals, then their hunting dogs. They scavenged for weeds and roots. There are even grim accounts of them resorting to cannibalism, driven by sheer, desperate hunger. A knight, clad in his expensive mail and noble surcoat, would be reduced to chewing on boiled leather belts and shoes to survive, just like everyone else. The brutal reality is that more medieval soldiers died from starvation and disease than they ever did from an enemy's blade. The real war wasn't fought with swords, it was fought with calories. Let me tell you a story about a French knight named Jean de Venette. He was a chronicler during the 100 Years' War in the 14th century. He wasn't on the front lines, but he saw the effects of the war firsthand. He wrote about the English armies as they practiced their chevauchée. He described how they would sweep through the French countryside, leaving nothing behind. He wrote, and I'm paraphrasing here, that they spared nothing and no one. He talks about villagers fleeing in terror, their homes burned, their food stolen. but he also recorded what the soldiers, the knights included, carried with them. He mentions them carrying hand mills in their packs. These were small, portable stones used to grind grain. Why is this significant? Because it shows they couldn't rely on finding bread. They planned on finding raw grain in the fields or in storage, and they were prepared to process it themselves. It paints a picture of a self-sufficient yet predatory force. A knight wasn't just a warrior. He had to be a survivor, a forager, and at times a miller, just to get his daily bread. It shows a level of grit and practicality that we often forget. Another incredible account comes from the chronicles of Jean Froissart, who wrote extensively about the 100 Years' War. He tells a story about a group of English knights and archers on a raid. They get cut off from their main army and are deep in enemy territory. They haven't eaten properly in days. They are exhausted. They stumble upon a small, isolated farmhouse. Instead of just ransacking it, they are so desperate and so few in number that they actually have to bargain with the farmer for food. The image of these fearsome English knights, the terror of the battlefield, haggling over the price of a few chickens and some bread because they are on the verge of starvation, is a powerful one. It reminds us that behind the armor and the heraldry, these were just hungry, mortal men, pushed to their absolute limits. So the next time you see a movie with knights feasting in a grand tent before a battle, remember the reality. Remember the rock-hard, weevil-infested biscuit. Remember the intensely salty meat. Remember the desperate search for an onion or a clove of garlic to make it all bearable. And remember that the most fearsome enemy a knight ever faced wasn't another man in armor. It was an empty stomach. The real story of a knight's diet isn't a tale of feasting. It's a story of survival against all odds. If you found this look into the gritty reality of medieval life interesting, then do me a favor and hit that like button. And for more deep dives that challenge what you think you know about history, make sure you subscribe and ring that bell so you don't miss our next video. Thanks for watching.